So Professor Jane Burns, would you like to come up? So is going to get us thinking about how breaking the bias can improve women's mental health. Jane also marvellously stepped in last Thursday. We had Paula Robinson lined up to do this session, and Paula was affected by COVID. So we're enormously grateful to Jane. So like Sam, Jane is highly qualified. She's a health strategist, passionate about mental health, wellbeing and innovation. And currently she's a strategic consultant to Together A1 and Clarity Plus. Among other things, she's the chair of Open Arms, a Veterans Family Counselling Service. So she knows a bit about the work that people in our sector do. Please welcome Jane.
Really good at dealing with people who've had their fingers chopped off, but not necessarily dealing with somebody who's psychologically injured because they've been raped in the workplace. So Safe Work SA, we prosecuted an organisation last year where a worker was raped, and that was the first one. We've prosecuted people who've been set on fire in bullying situations.
Is it a gendered issue? Is it age and experience? Is it LGBTIQ? Is it neurodiverse? Is it Indigenous? Is it non-English speaking backgrounds? I mean, it feels like it's any differential where there is a difference between power. And so while I'd like to say, yeah, it's gendered, and I think in many cases it is, there are examples where it's not just about gender, it's about difference of people and acceptance of diversity.
It is a gendered issue and it is difficult to speak up. It's a gendered issue because power is a gendered issue. And power is at the heart of why people may feel that they are not supported to speak up. And if we look at some of the examples that are either in the media today or over the last couple of years, even when people have spoken up, the avenues for them to seek redress are not good enough to enact system change. So if we go through some of the financial services examples, which especially the listed ones where my interest then from a super fund point of view was as an owner on behalf of, health and community services workers as it was. So, you want that engagement with the company. How are you doing this? How are you promoting this culture? And things will be written in policies and things could be painted on walls and things might be said on training days. But if the board knows about something and they either address it by paying someone out and seeking an NDA or they don't address it, then actually you don't have a speak-up culture. You've got a power dynamic going on that is unhealthy and presents a risk. And it's most often gendered because the people in power are most often men. And the people who are the victims of workplace either misbehaviour or bullying or something more serious are most often women.
I'd agree with that, and public companies, obviously there's more transparency there, so there's more opportunity to have a look, under the bonnet and see what's going on. But it was a man's world, and there is some effort, pulling it the other way to do that. And I agree wholeheartedly with that take on it. Particularly in the financial services area, it is still very blokey. It is, it's. The hierarchy has been like that for 100 years, and that takes time. Again, back to time. I'm a very impatient person. If you got to know me,
I mean, it's definitely a gender issue, but I also think it's age and other diversity issues as well, and where you are in the hierarchy of the organisation. And I think, when I look at boards and when I jumped on my first board, I was, a minority being a female, but there were no younger people than me, and I don't cast myself as a young person anymore. I wish I could. But again, that opportunity for young people to be able to speak up and say things. So I think it's definitely the gender, but even more broader than that as well. We need to open up the channels so young people can speak.
Yeah. I agree with those sentiments. It is gendered. It is that power imbalance. And I think we're probably at the start of a wave of disclosure. So the last 10 years has seen some change, but I think the last couple of years in particular has seen some rapid change, and I think that change is going to accelerate over the next 5 years. And it's with people who've got courage, who, like Brittany Higgins and others, who've made those disclosures, actually ventilate the subject, and people say, that happened to me. And people who've had those behaviours occur to them might not ordinarily think it's a work health and safety issue, but it's only through ventilation and discussion publicly that they will then realise that I'm in that boat. So I think, and I'm planning for my agency and pushing it with the other regulators, that we fully expect to see a wave of complaints come through in the next 5 years.
Because ideally you want the regulator, to be checking, but not finding anything. So how do you get in front of something that's ran ahead of you already?
So thanks, guys. I wanted to start with that because having worked in suicide prevention for 25 plus years, I'd never thought of it as a gender issue. I'd never thought of it as a structural issue. We'd been told to come in and teach people about mindfulness, talk about stigma reduction, make sure that people felt comfortable actually being able to have a chat and put their hand up for help. And when really you look at it, it's not about emergency services, it's not about financial services, not in defence. It's across the board that we've got systemic and structural issues that we need to deal with. And until we start dealing with them, it doesn't matter if you've got the yoga at work or the fruit bowl or if you've got an EAP, it actually matters that you can actually start to break down some of those power differentials. So I'm going to hand to you guys for a minute or two just to have a quick chat. What do you think about that? Is it gender bias? Is it structural bias? Is it both? What is actually going on in your own workplaces? So over to you guys, because I know you've been sitting there quietly for a while. Okay, I might bring you back. I know you've got lots and lots and lots to say, but this is sort of setting the scene for the conversation. So if we think about our workplaces, and I know you all do different things, some of you are frontline responders, some of you sit behind desks, but it's pretty much commonly accepted that providing a physically safe workplace for your employees is the law, and you manage your risks. So someone who's on the front line obviously is exposed to trauma, exposed to challenges, but you try to mitigate as much as you possibly can with equipment. So keeping people safe, making sure that there are harnesses, making sure that you wear the best equipment that you possibly can to keep you safe. And we know that that's true. You saw Martin Campbell, he's the regulator for South Australia, but he's head of the WorkSafe authorities. Regulators understand how and what to do when it comes to the physical safety of workers. And you get into lots of trouble if you put your workers into a situation where physically they're harmed. He talked about someone losing their finger. It's actually more expensive to deal with a psychological workplace claim than it is for someone to lose their finger, which seems astonishing to me, but that's what they're seeing in terms of occupational health and safety claims. And they're on the rise, so they're increasing by 30% every year. They are essentially going to send the regulators broke if we don't start to really think seriously about how do we address this from a psychological safety in the workplace perspective, in exactly the same way we've addressed physical conditions within the workplace. And Susan talks a lot about prevention, it's my favourite thing, but workplaces do break people. When you're exposed to trauma in the workplace and you're not supported through that trauma, it can break you. When you're bullied in the workplace, it can break you. When you're told about your shoes not being quite appropriate and your pants not being right, and believe me, I had plenty of comments on my hair, my shoes, my clothes, it can cause you psychological distress. When you don't feel comfortable being able to speak up and say, actually, that behaviour is not okay, or that comment is not right, or that structural inequality resulted in me not being able to walk up and have a conversation about what was going on, that is not a psychologically safe workplace. That's very different to mental health issues and being able to put your hand up and say, actually, I'm struggling with this. That's also important. But if we're really serious about breaking the bias, we need to break the structural biases and allow people to seek care and support when they can. As Susan said, I chair Open Arms, the Veterans Families Counselling Service, and it was for transition veterans. Without doubt, every story I heard about the veteran who had transitioned was about the fact not that they were exposed to trauma because they'd gone to Afghanistan and seen terrible things. That was a part of it. But it was often the chain of command. It was often I couldn't speak up. I couldn't seek support. It was career limiting. If I put my hand up, I wasn't going to be deployed. If I put my hand up, they were going to think I was weak. And that was not a gendered issue, that was a chain of command issue. It also was gendered because it was over the top of, and I think in that report that you've written, Susan, which I'll talk a little bit about, being a woman, you had to be double the amount of being the man, but it was one of those things that was structural, chain of command, and career limiting. So we've got two things happening in terms of this break the bias. How do we get rid of our structural constraints, and how do we actually create a workplace that is kinder, safer, and more caring, while acknowledging that actually our jobs are tough and what we do is actually pretty hard work. So, legislation's come in. Psychologically safe workplaces are mandated. As a board, as executives, as governments, you can go to jail if you do not keep your workplace psychologically safe. The whistleblowing policy has changed the way in which people talk up, and we've seen that happening in Parliament with Brittany Higgins. We've seen Grace Tame being named as Australian of the Year. The Rio Tinto report came out 2 weeks ago, 20 rapes in 5 years. What did the CEO say? I can't believe we've got this systemic abuse within our organisations. I'm like, are you hiding under a rock? Like, anyone who knows the mining community knows that it is extremely blokey, extremely male-dominated, and that the only way you can succeed is to, I grew up in Port Pirie, so I can say this with authority on this particular one, it's actually a bloke's environment. And how you can think that that's not happening doesn't make any sense to me. But it's not just the mining community. It happens in manufacturing. You know, we've seen the reports come out from ambulance and police, financial services, aged care. It's across the board. So we've got a long way to go in terms of providing psychologically safe workplaces. Okay, so back to you guys to get you talking again. What do you think of when you think about a psychologically safe workplace? First question. And second, what challenges do you actually see in your workplace? And again, I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes, and then we might just come back to have a quick put your hand up and throw some things at me, and I'll keep going. But these are the conversations I want you to have as you progress throughout the day. Back to you. Okay, guys. I'll bring you back. So we might start just with table 5. Table 5, what are some of the words you think of when you think about psychological safety in the workplace? What came up? What did you talk about? Speak openly, yep. Yep, supported and assisted when they do speak up. This table here, number 7.
We've worked out that any psychological OHS complaint should be treated the same as physical OHS complaint. You expect action, expect reporting.
Excellent. OH&S, same as a physical, expect action and expect it to be followed up quickly. I won't go on for too much because I have got some slides, but maybe the back, table 28.
We were just talking about having the opportunity to and support to speak up when actions do occur. So I used an example of one of my first activation shifts in the State Control Centre. I was in with some of our partner agencies and dishes got put next to me. And I went and spoke to the leaders of the room and said, this is not on. And they said, yep, our next meeting when everyone's there, just stand up and tell them if they can walk them down to the room, they can walk them back. And then they supported me and said, if you can't take your dishes back, you have to eat up in the other end, and you have to eat up in the kitchen. And that behaviour stopped.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I'm sure you'll have many conversations over the course of the day. Trust and respect, diversity and inclusion, open and honest conversations, but it's hard to speak up when the culture doesn't allow you to speak up. So we've got to start to break down those barriers of a listen up and a speak up culture. And also being the bystanders, we all observe these behaviours, but it's often hard to point them out. And that's a real challenge. And I think, again, the Brittany Higgins one is a classic example where she could have stayed quiet. It was career limiting. It was her standing up and saying, this happened to me in Parliament. She took on a Member of Parliament and the hallowed House of Parliament. It's been tough. She will have struggled. She will be psychologically challenged by that. But she has spoken up and she has got support for it. And so when you think about those things, when you think about a psychological claim, they're about $25,000 versus a physical health claim. So to your point about the earlier they're supported, the earlier you get back to work, the earlier you return to work, if you can stay and roll, we certainly know that in defence. If you can stay and roll and you're not transitioned out, you go on to successfully have a career that you're not damaged in. Okay, so moving right along, psychological safety, fostering a climate of respect, trust and openness in which people can raise concerns and suggestions without fear of reprisal. It is very hard to speak up about your boss if your boss is the bully. It's very hard to talk about what's going on in a culture where abuse is accepted if that's just the status quo. So we've got to get better at allowing and changing structural barriers that are put in place that create this fear of reprisal. And in psychologically safe teams, and I know you guys are big on team and teamwork, safe teams, team members feel accepted and respected. And I know I wanted to show that video at the beginning because is it just about gender or is it about all of the other things that make us vulnerable? LGBTIQ, disability, a whole host of things. Age was brought up in one of the conversations. Volunteer versus non-volunteer. I know that came up in the report that I'll talk to in a minute. So I like to say mental health is everyone's business. I think I mentioned to you guys I started at Beyond Blue back in 2000. That was in a time when no one talked about mental health. Stigma was not discussed, mental illness was not discussed, and people often thought about mental illness as being the person who ended up in an asylum or the person who was crazy, and they were the words that were used. It was not talked about in the same way that it is now. And so we've come a long way in reducing stigma, which is great, but we have not come a long way in actually allowing people to step up and say, actually, I'm struggling. People often talk about mental health, they know the signs, they know the symptoms, they've known that for a while. Everyone knows Beyond Blue, but when you actually ask people what do they put their hand up for help, it takes them a long time to put their hand up for help, and by the time they put their hand up, they're often too unwell and they can't return to role. So the prevention angle and the importance of seeking support earlier and reducing some of those structural barriers about putting your hand up for help is so critical. But it is everyone's business. It's not just the executive's business. It's not just the CEO's business. It's top down, wrong way, top down. See, I haven't done this for a while. Top down, and it's bottom up. And Martin talks a lot about that, top down, bottom up. Walk the floor, chat to your people, understand what's going on for them. Make sure you know that if someone has been exposed to something, what are the ramifications of it and how do you follow up from it? And sorry, this was an Apple presentation, so it's got some weird things happening in it. Why should it be such a big focus? And I'm sure you all know these statistics, so I won't dwell on them. We know 1 in 5 Australians live with a mental illness across their lifespan. But think about this room. At some stage, 50% of this group of women are going to experience a mental health condition. And it may be work-related. It may be because life's messy and we deal with the messiness of life. It may be vicarious trauma for something that happened as a child. But mental health is everyone's business because, like physical health, you have to look after your brain. Your brain eventually breaks if you put it under so much duress. If you've been exposed to trauma as a child, you're far more likely to experience a mental health condition. Genetically, you're far more likely if you've had family members. So it's complex, but life is complex. And it's not a quick fix. It's not an easy thing. It's not just saying, let's stamp out the stigma and people will start seeking support. That's absolutely not what it's about. It's also not about, even though it's important, things like mindfulness. That is important. Learning to breathe, being able to breathe, feeling that you can manage your stresses is important. But that's not the only thing that can happen. If you're in a toxic work environment, it doesn't matter how yogi mindful you are, it's not going to help you deal with the challenges of that terrible culture. So we know 50% will experience it. Latest data, 60% of employees don't speak up. They do stay silent. We know 3% of people use an employee assistance program. It's not okay. There's something wrong with that. Just even calling that out points to the structural inequalities. And we know it costs a bomb. I won't dwell on this. Productivity Commission, again, major report done by the federal government. The Victorian Royal Commission into Mental Health said there were structural issues. The system's broken. It costs a lot of money. And we know that workplaces, when they break people, end up bearing the cost of that. So if you can get ahead of it and you can start to think about prevention, then from a workplace wellbeing perspective, as an organisation and as an industry, you're far better off. The return on investment is good, but if you let it fester and if you let it go on, you are going to bear the consequences of those costs. Okay, so again, I won't dwell on this. There have been reports written. As I mentioned, it's across the board. It doesn't matter which industry you are, but just to pull some of them out. This is Victoria's Police Commissioner Graham Ashton back in 2017. Women get intimidated, stood over, spoken over, excluded and overlooked all day, every day in this job because of their gender. That is not okay. That is not okay. So I'm looking forward to the conversations you're going to be having with your male counterparts today about how do we, not just as women, step up and change the culture, but how do men step up and change the culture? Because it's a bright, big, shiny spotlight shining down on them with these reports being written. The Breaking Barriers, Changing Lives. I've talked about this research. It's worth just having a quick look at some of the conversations that have come out. From my colleagues and the people that I talk to, you get more stressed about working with someone who's awful than the emotional response of going to a job where somebody dies. I mean, that is astonishing. But that is a statement that's come out of the research that's been done by the Foundation. That's not okay. The breadth and depth, this one's the Workplace Equality and Ambulance Victoria, the breadth and depth of issues of incivility, disrespect, discrimination, sexual harassment, bullying and victimisation in our workplace is deeply disturbing. Far too many of these stories hide in plain sight, accepted, tolerated or ignored. Each and every one of these stories recount a level of harm that has been inflicted on our people by those they work alongside. Sometimes the harm is short-lived, sometimes it is career-ending, often it ends in long-term pain and suffering. Your point about let's get people into care earlier if they are exposed to something. But like defence, it wasn't going to war that was the problem, it was actually the structure that didn't support people in the work that they were going to do to serve their country. Like the work you guys do, it's probably not the accidents, the fires, even though they're traumatic. It's potentially the conversations you can't or you're not able to have to get the support that you need when you need it. So what can be done to support the wellbeing of the workforce? And again, I was going to get you to talk, but I think I'm running out of time, Susan. So let me leave these with you and then I'll give you 5 minutes. Yep. So is employee wellbeing measured? You can't deal with something if you don't measure it. And by measured, I mean de-identified, so that you can understand where are the stress points, is there an event that causes more pressure, is there something within a team that is problematic? And if you measure it, you can start to address it and you can start to improve it. Even if you're at lower than low base, you can start to build a culture and you can start to measure against that and you can start to trial and test things, what works and what doesn't work. I've been astounded at the number of workplaces who introduce a workplace wellbeing program, their EAP program, they have their mindfulness, they have their yoga, and I've talked a bit about that, but they don't actually measure, did this actually improve the wellbeing of my workplace? Did anyone come to the yoga? Did anyone participate in the mindfulness program? Was the workplace wellbeing program used? Did you read the resources? I think again in your report that was written is there's so much resource out there, it's almost impossible to navigate how to use that resource and how to use it at the right time and how to know when it is the right time to use it. As a leader, is your EAP being utilised? If it's not, and you know the figures, then you've got to ask yourself the question, is it career limiting to put my hand up and go to the EAP? Do people feel that their confidentiality is going to be abused? What's going on that's not an appropriate source of support and help? How quickly are OH&S claims resolved? Is it safe to speak up about abuse, workload, stress and mental health? Your point here. Do you have a whistleblowing policy and is it one that people feel safe using? Do they feel safe to listen up and to talk up? and to actually take the next steps without fear of retribution? Do you have a workplace mental health plan? But not just a plan or a policy. Is it practical? Is it actionable? Is it measurable? Do you have champions who advocate on behalf of it? Anyone can write a plan, anyone can put a policy in place, but if you don't actually take action on making it work, then it's just a plan that sits as good as this beautiful book. Are conversations about mental health normalised? And this is the stigma one, but not just coming and having someone talk about, I went through this and then I got some support. Actually having those conversations, and I think the pandemic has done one thing which is good. Many terrible things, but one thing which is good. It's actually made people aware of and ask the question, but are you really okay? You know, we've been in lockdown for 250 days. I know I'm not okay because I'm dealing with 3 kids at home. I've got one with a severe disability who's sat on his chair for the last 3 weeks, sitting on his computer, boinging it and making a noise and spinning around. Like, I feel like I'm going mad. But being able to have those conversations are really important. And I think if we can thank the pandemic for one thing, I think it will potentially have allowed those conversations to be easier. But it used to drive me insane. Are you okay day? Well, great, we have one day where you ask, are you okay? There's 365 days in there. Like, why is it just one day? And everyone talks about that now, but it was like, oh, we've ticked the box, tick, are you okay day? Our conversation, I've talked about that one, is it career limiting to seek help for mental health challenges? And I know certainly in the Defence Force, and it was not just anecdotal, it was the report that was written on pathways to healthcare, it was career limiting. People did not put their hand up, they would rather have dealt with it themselves. There was self-stigma, there was real stigma, and there were also barriers to access to care, including cost, confidentiality, a whole host of things. Now, we've gone a long way in Defence and Veterans Affairs to address help seeking and pathways to care, but it still doesn't change the structural limitations. And then, does the chain of command reduce the likelihood of speaking up? And I talk about chain of command, but it's true in any workplace. Does your boss allow you to feel comfortable in talking about it? So I might give you 5 minutes. Yep. Have a chat. Have a chat about all of these different things. Okay. I'll bring us back. Susan, how long have we got? 5? Perfect. Okay, guys, I'll bring us back. I actually feel quite comfortable to finish my talk right now. But I did want to finish on Paula Robinson's work, which normally we would come in and we would do a talk on wellbeing. But when I really thought about it, I thought I can come in and do that talk on wellbeing, but that's not going to really get you thinking about what are the structural things that we need changing and how we're going to break the bias. So what is wellbeing? Well, wellbeing certainly is not being happy all the time. It's not the Instagram perfect family with the Instagram perfect life that, you know, they get out and they exercise every day and they get enough sleep and they're never stressed and they're never angry. Wellbeing is about life, and life's pretty messy. It's about the ups and downs, and it's about how you actually manage those ups and downs. I know Susan talked about resilience, which has been a bit of a buzzword, but it is really how do you actually put the scaffolding around you that allows you to manage the extremes of life, whether that's something terrible that happens, the death of a loved one, or whether it's something that happens in your work life. It's how do I get through those periods of time? Or if it's something simple that you just suddenly wake up one day and go, geez, that really annoyed me and I feel terrible about it. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And I think, again, that's been one of the big challenges of the wellbeing movement. It's not a movement, it is a science of wellbeing. So the definition, which is the one that most of you will know, comes from the World Health Organization. Their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their own community. I think increasingly people are recognising that it's not just about the individual, but it's actually about the individual in the context of the way in which they engage with other people and the planet. And I think pandemic has shone a light on that. Over the top of that, we've now got all of the issues with climate change, and I know as first responders you are dealing with a whole host of those issues that are coming about because of fire and flood and climate change. And so when we think about wellbeing and we think about it in the context of us as individuals, it's multidimensional. It's physical and mental. We've made a mistake of separating the two. Your brain's not separated from your body. Your body responds to the challenges that your brain feels. It is mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's social, and it is environmental. And we do feel stresses as the environment becomes more problematic. And again, I'll share these slides. I don't want to dwell on it for too long. So to the prevention, we absolutely do have choices, and it's been the bane of my existence that the big movement around mental health reform in this country has been about services. Yes, we need services. Yes, we need great services. We need high quality services. We need services that measure their impact and provide really good care. But if we're just waiting for services, we're just waiting to break people, and we're not focused on how do we actually prevent these problems before they become so systemic that you can't deal with them. We want people to stay in jobs. There are 3 things that people say they want in life. One of them is a job. You find meaning and purpose in your job. You find connection in your job. You find connection in your peers. If you're not enjoying your job, that is a compromise to your mental health. So our big focus has been on prevention and what does it look like to actually promote, practice and prevent. And I'll finish here. This was based on a talk, and again, it's one that we could have done. I didn't want to do it, but it's how do you build up your own mental fitness? How do you create your own little toolbox of mental fitness tools, resources? And it can be just one simple thing. There's a guy out of the States called BJ Fogg, one tiny habit, and it can be as simple as, I just want to go for a walk around the block. You know, if you're so unhappy that you can't get yourself out of bed, it might be as simple as, I just get myself out and I go for a walk and I get some sunshine. It might be that you just want to get yourself to bed at 10 o'clock at night so that you get a good night's sleep. It can be one simple thing. You don't have to take on 500 things and suddenly become the most fittest, mentally fit, healthy, well person. Just one thing, if you just leave the room with one simple thing. So we think mental fitness is the way to think about it because like physical fitness, people get it. If you're going to run a marathon, you don't go out and put your runner shoes on and go for a 42k run. You train, you practice, you build up your muscles, you build up your endurance. And the reason we think it makes sense is because it builds around those things that we understand. How do I actually build my strength muscle? How can I be flexible so that when I'm faced with challenges, which we will all be faced with, we can flexibly address them? What does endurance look like? How do I pick myself up after a difficult time and keep going? And what are the resources and skills that I can use? And how do I build team? And I think the most important one is the building of team, and that's probably the one that I think as you take back into your own workplaces, what does it mean to build out a team that is supportive, that is safe, that you feel comfortable chatting to, that you actually have a champion that you can rely on. You've got someone you can ring up and say, actually, I've had a really shit day. We call them buddies, but you can call them whatever you want. You've actually got someone that you can reach out to because the number one thing that results in poor mental health is not feeling connected and not finding meaning and purpose in life. There are other things you can do, sleep, diet, exercise, you will have heard it all, management of stress, but that meaning and purpose and that connection is probably the single most important thing that a workplace can offer you. And if your workplace doesn't offer you that, then it's time to call it out. Finish on that. Thank you.